Okay, so now this is the time for the Dhamma talk. And so I always, ask people, what is the Dhamma? And most of the Buddhists would say, well, it's the teaching of the Buddha. And then you ask them, well, what did the Buddha teach? Well, he taught the Dhamma. So which came first, the Buddha or the Dhamma? The chicken or the egg? Of course, from our understanding, from the Buddha's own mouth, he said that he simply rediscovered the ancient eternal Dhamma, the ancient eternal truths that he rediscovered. So he didn't discover it on his own, he simply rediscovered the natural truths about existence, about the world, you might say, as they existing according to the laws of nature. But of course, there can be many interpretations of that, depending on each person's religious person's experience, the way they interpret experience, and so on. But the Buddha is primarily concerned with the nature of suffering and the nature of happiness. Because essentially all beings want to live in a state of happiness and to become free from suffering. But happiness means different things to different people. And so, they come up with their own ideas of, what's going to make them happy and what causes them suffering. If you ask an ordinary person on the street, who's the cause of your suffering? Well, Donald Trump. Or if it's not him, it's your husband or wife, or it's any number of hundreds or thousands of different people or situations that we normally say, that's the problem of cause of my suffering. But the Buddha went much deeper than that. So anyway, the teachings of the Dhamma is about the nature of suffering and happiness, how it is created within the mind. Now, the average person, when they hear the word suffering, they're relating it primarily to external causes, like broken bones, getting sickness. This body is being subject to sickness and pains and being broken and causing all diseases. But these are primarily external and are caused by so many different kind of conditions. Or people suffer because it's too cold or it's too hot. Or they suffer because of other external forces, hurricanes, tornadoes, volcanoes, tsunamis, infinite numbers of external reasons. And some people suffer from guilt, worry, remorse, and fear, mental torment. That their mind torments them usually it's because of guilt, worry, remorse, and fear from having done things that you shouldn't have done in the past, or having not done things that you should have done in the past. And from our present actions, people get caught up in abusing others, killing, telling lies, other types of abusive speech, stealing, sexual misconduct, hurting and abusing others, and intoxicating their minds with drink and drugs in order to get away from their problems. So, these are just sort of what you could call the average world and the way the average world deals with their problems. But according to Dhamma, sure, those are one cause of suffering, but not the primary cause of suffering. The primary cause of suffering is the way we react to the world around us. So suffering has basically two causes: the substantial cause of suffering and the circumstantial cause of suffering. So the circumstantial cause of suffering are all these sort of external connected scenarios that I just mentioned. But the substantial cause of suffering is the way our mind has been programmed and conditioned to interpret and to react to what is going on around us. When we react to sickness, disease, react to harsh words from others, react to things that we don't like, react to things that bring us discomfort or pain, the mind usually reacts in one way or another to get away from it. Or with greed and lust and desire, we react to try to get a hold of or capture the things that we crave or want. And these also cause us a lot of pain and suffering. And it's our reactions to the world around us that really where the practice of the Dhamma plays its important part. Because we cannot change the external world. In the nature of these bodies, they're going to get sick, they're going to get diseases, they're going to get in accidents and get broken bones and other all kind of physical pains and traumas and worse, and of course death. And no one can change that. Not even a God or not even the Buddha could change the nature of the impermanent world. And also the things around us we cannot control. We can't control the weather, although people try to. They're trying to control storms and all these things, but ultimately they're not going to be successful. And we can't control others. You try to control your children, you try to control your spouse, you try to control the politicians, and that also only works to a certain degree. Usually it doesn't work because of the backlash from others. And then there's about controlling our own thoughts. We try to even control our own thoughts. But we see how difficult it is. How many people had some difficulty this morning in their meditation controlling their thoughts? Why is that? How do they get there? So, it's about the mind. Actually, the deepest level of understanding the Dhamma is about understanding the mind. Because the Buddha, in a very famous statement, said that the world, the arising of the world, the ceasing of the world, and the path leading to the ceasing of the world is right here within this 5 or 6 foot long body, with its nervous system, memory, and consciousness. So basically what that means is the world as we know it is actually a creation and a projection that's coming from within from the unconscious mind. And that's due to the course of evolution. Through the course of evolution, the minds have been conditioned to react and think in so many different ways. And And then even when you're born as a baby, the baby looks around, all it does is absorb and imitate what it sees around it, from its parents, teachers at school, friends, what it looks at TV, or nowadays, of course, on the internet, and so on. Like a sponge, it absorbs everything. And not knowing that it's going to be the cause of so much trouble later on is because not understanding the nature of the mind, and not understanding how the mind is a process, and it's a conditioned process. It's basically a programmed process, programmed to react to the world around us. But no one really taught us about the mind, to pay attention to the mind. This mind is the most important thing in the universe, is the most powerful thing in the universe, more than a nuclear bomb, probably. Because the mind of one person could have started World War II. Because one mind can influence so many other minds and wind up, causing something like that affected the whole world still, so many years afterward. And people suffering from their injuries. So this mind can do a lot of good, and the mind can also do a lot of harm. To ourselves, and to others, and to both. But especially to ourselves. So, anyway, the practice of Dhamma, understanding the mind, and the mind's creation process is really important to understanding how we've gotten caught in the web of confusion and pain and suffering. Because once you understand how the mind creates suffering, you can understand how it can decreate suffering. How it can be reprogrammed. And basically, all of the Buddhist teachings focus, the teachings of the Dhamma focus around this aspect about understanding the mind and the causes of suffering and happiness. And understanding the internal world and the external world. The external world basically is a projection of our mind. Because a person can be looking outside, and if their mind is disturbed and full of paranoia or have some other psychotic disturbances, we could think people are chasing them, after them, seeing monsters. The person standing next to them won't see anything. He might be quite happy. And all that's going on in the mind of a person. So the external world is not really the cause of the suffering so much. It's the mind, how the mind creates and interprets and reacts to that. So basically the Buddha was like a mental scientist. And when he sat down under the Bodhi tree, he'd been wandering around, visiting other great meditation masters and learning their techniques. And he, reached the highest level of any type of meditation that anybody in the day was doing, but realized, that even though he could absorb himself in infinite light and bliss and stay that way for a few days, when he came out of that, he fundamentally hadn't changed too much in terms of the inner, the pride and conceit and self-identification and other types of attachments. So really the practice of Dhamma is, is the journey about, going back inside and to the source of the mind. In other words, the material world is a projection of the mind. So, when we open our eyes, we project outwards, creating this movie of, these things are good, these things are bad, these things I don't like, these things are okay, and just following all of our habits. And so we're led to the kind of things that our mind wants to experience, but then leaves out so much other things. And most people's minds just go around in circles. So understanding the mind is really what is the main practice of the Dhamma, and the things that affect the mind. And we couldn't and shouldn't say actually the mind and body. A lot of people see these as two different things, but actually the practice of Dhamma, you can't really separate the mind and body. Only in the very highest levels of concentration and liberation maybe you can, but from all intents and purposes they're fused together. And as I mentioned, the mind operates through this body. But most people's minds are not connected to the body. They become disconnected from the body. And I've mentioned this in so many other talks about, when a baby is born, its mind is still basically in a state of oneness. Its mind hasn't divided the world up into thousands of different things. Its consciousness is basically oceanic. It has a very, kind of a, primordial type of awareness. Then little by little it starts seeing things, get attached to things, and it starts focusing outward and loses that connection with the body. And so as a person becomes a teenager and adult, largely their mind has become disconnected from the body. And it's focused externally. And believing that the external world is the source of its happiness or suffering. So it fights the external world to get rid of its suffering, and it tries to crave or cling to the pleasurable feelings of the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind that bring it some comfort or bring it some pleasure. But all those things are changing, and we cannot control them. And so it's this disconnection from the mind and body that's one of the primary sources of suffering. Because the mind is fixed in the past and future. It's been disconnected from the present moment. The body is basically in the present moment. It's just here. You're sitting, standing, walking, moving. And so when you're aware of those things, at that moment the mind is in the present. But because of force of habit, it can't stay centered in the present moment or body very long, because it easily gets pulled out by sounds, sights, smells, taste, and body feelings, and our thoughts, especially our thoughts. And the mind gets pulled in every which way because of our various thoughts. And most of those thoughts are based on desire for pleasurable feeling, and anger or hatred based on painful feelings. So caught in a tug of war between trying to get pleasurable feeling that you don't yet have, or keep it if you do have it, and struggling to get away from painful feeling that comes to you, and then scheming and planning how you're going to keep painful feeling away from you in the future. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Is that a way to live? unfortunately, people have no alternative, or they don't know any alternative. And it's not necessarily the fault of, the fault is the collective momentum of society and ignorance that's been gaining momentum since the beginning of evolution. And so it's something very difficult to overcome. And it takes somebody like the Buddha, an enlightened being who was able to discover the real truth about the mind, and more importantly, being able to explain it to people in a clear way that they themselves then can learn how to learn about their own mind and to become a master of their own mind, you might say, and to reprogram the mind. Computer scientists can program a computer, right? But a computer is not much different than our mind, because a computer uses dots and dashes, whatever, for programs and instructions. But our brain and consciousness works the same way, based on sensory vibrations of sound, visual, smell, taste, touch, and even thinking are basically just like dots and dashes. They're just the momentary vibrations that are coming through the senses. And this is basically our training in mindfulness, actually, and in Vipassana meditation. The training in mindfulness has different stages. But when it comes to the stage of what we call Vipassana meditation, it means listening to the momentary sensations that are coming through your senses and to observe their impact on the mind, to see how the mind gets caught and led away by pleasurable feeling, or how it resists and struggles against painful feeling, and how those trigger off all kinds of associated thoughts and worries. And to understand how basically it's been we've been programming ourselves to do that. Again, not any fault of our own, but because that's the only thing the baby knows how to do is whatever their parents are doing, whatever other people are doing around them, for the large part, they get caught into it. So it's ignorance. The basic starting point of the Dhamma is, or the cause of suffering is ignorance. That means not understanding the truth about this mind and how it's become overly enmeshed and caught in the web of karma, or in the web of sensory, the net of sensory attraction. It's like a fish getting caught in a net. Our mind gets caught in the net of sound, smells, taste, touch, body feelings, and our own thoughts. Because basically we take them for self. We take them for being something permanent and believe that we're the owner of these things. Anyway, that's a deeper level of understanding. But simply to develop that mindfulness of what are the things that keeps our mind caught and struggling, and keeps it drawn out into the past and future. As I mentioned before, all problems of the world are problems of the past and future, because they all come from the mind, which is caught in the past and future. You remembered somebody who insulted or hurt you in the past, so you remember that, and then you plot to how am I going to get revenge in the future. or you remember some pleasant sensation you had in the past, and oh, I want that pleasurable sensation again. How can I recreate this feeling again? And so we go on trying to recreate the situations or similar situations from the past to the future. But that's a never-ending pursuit because of impermanence, and that we cannot control the external world. So, the practice of mindfulness stems from the Buddha's teaching on what's called the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So even Vipassana meditation basically has its origin in the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And this is the most important discourse on meditation that the Buddha gave, especially in developing wisdom. And it concerns the body and the mind. This body is considered the outer shell for the mind, like a hermit crab carries its shell on its back. So we're carrying this body around with us. In the nervous system, the nervous system is the link or the connection between the physical body and the brain and the consciousness. And everything passes through the nervous system, the vibrations of the world. And the mind then reacts to them. So if we want to be able to see our thoughts, we have to be grounded and connected to the body. Because again, the body is the only thing we have that connects us to the present moment, really. It's too difficult just to put your mind in the present moment. Only 1 out of a billion people probably could do that. So that's why the Buddha, in his great wisdom, saw that the body was the natural doorway for the mind. So by continually reminding yourself, what am I doing now? And learning how to keep connected to the body, which is not that difficult. I mean, it's there all the time. 50 or more kilos of flesh and bones. So, and you just remind yourself, oh yes, sitting, sitting, standing, standing, walking, walking, lifting my arm up, putting my arm down, turning the head to the right, turning the head to the left, turning the head up, looking at something, hearing something. It's the most natural thing in the world, actually. But our mind has become unnatural, that's the point. Because we've lost that connection to really the natural mental process. So it's a training, mindfulness training, because we have to retrain ourselves, basically. Because, for anything that you've reached in your life, you had to have training, right? To ride a bicycle, you had to train yourself. To drive a car, you had to train yourself. To speak a language, you had to train yourself. To do any kind of a job, you had to train yourself. Go to 12 years of, schooling, and then go to more years of university. But what about training our own body and mind? And how to live? People train themselves for the future, but no one trains himself for the present moment. How to live in the present moment. So again, that's the focus in Dhamma, is about how to train our body and mind to find that natural inner peace that comes when the mind is reconnected to its source, so to speak, to the consciousness. So anyway, I've mentioned these. So the body is the first foundation of mindfulness. And so basically that means being grounded and connected to the body and understanding how this body operates. And then when you're grounded and connected to the body, then you'll start to feel the subtler sensations under the skin. So the second level of mindfulness is once you've been grounded and centered in the breathing body, you get connected to the whole nervous system. The nervous system is like a spider web. You know, a spider web? Spider anchors his web to some tree branches or rocks or other things, right? So our nervous system is connected to the eyeballs, to the nose, the ears, all the pores in the skin. And the tongue, and even to the base of the mind. And all the sense stimuluses are vibrating that web. That's what's called sensation and feeling. So once the mind is grounded and centered in the breathing body, you don't have to look, you automatically have a front row seat. You will naturally start feeling things. Oh, there's an itch over here. Oh, this, you feel a little body twitch. Or you feel so many different little sensations. Sensation over here. A touch of clothing on the left knee, touch of clothing on the right knee, touch of clothing on the shoulder. The pulse of blood over here, pulse of blood over here. And you just start training yourself to notice and feel these sensations. And you see how each one, some of them are pleasant, some of them are unpleasant. Or you hear a sound. One sound produces a pleasant feeling. Oh, the bird's chirping. Oh, nice little birdie. Then you hear, a screeching of car tires and a banging out on the street, and produces a painful feeling, and the mind spins off. But so you understand what are called the feelings. So observing painful and pleasant feelings and how they trigger off your mind to get it carried away in so many types of thought. And many of those thoughts are unimportant and just trigger off more associated thoughts that carry us further and further away from the present moment and trigger off more and more thoughts of greed, hatred, fear, worry, and anxiety. And again, for most people, this is an automatic process. People don't even know it's happening. Or if they know it's happening, they can't control it, as some of you mentioned when I asked that question about your thoughts. So anyway, the four foundations of mindfulness, it's also like an obstacle course. So we sit down, and then the biggest problems people have are, sleepiness, or the physical pains, or just the posture, slouching. So it's like an obstacle course. You have to learn how to deal with the obstacles in the body to be able to, sit straight, because again, meditation happens between the brain and the nervous system. But most people haven't trained their bodies for that. They train it for running, to win a marathon, or to lift weights, or to win contests, but they haven't trained it. They haven't trained their spine to be able to sit straight. or haven't done the proper exercises to keep the joints loosened up so that the electrical energy in the body flows freely. And it's because of that stiffness why so much painful feelings arise too. So anyway, I'm just saying this to understand the nature of the body and what helps it to have more pain, and how to, the hindrances, and how to help to minimize them. So when you're able to finally not be so bothered by sleepiness and the gross pains of the body, then the mind kind of gets under the skin. You go through that external barrier of the skin. Everything on the outside of the skin is the world out there. Everything on the inside of the skin, inwards in the mind, is what we call the inner world. So you learn how not to react to the sounds. So you work your way through the outer world, which is the body. And then you get to the subtler vibrations inside. And then, but we want to feel them actually. That's the training. And then to try to feel the subtler and subtler sensations that are going on. And that takes the awareness deeper inside. To get closer to your thoughts, because all thoughts arise from basically these sensations. But because we can't even be aware of sensations, how can you be aware of your thoughts? And that's why most people get lost in their thoughts, because first of all, they're not grounded in the body. Secondly, because of that, they're not feeling the subtlest sensations that are triggering off thoughts. And so they simply get carried away by their thoughts. But basically, it's because they're not grounded and centered in the body. And then the last stage of mindfulness is the subtle dhammas. So we talked about first getting centered in the body. That helps you to then be aware of the subtle physical vibrations and the painful and pleasant sensations that are arising, that our mind is getting hooked to and attracted to, reacting to. And once we can dodge those and remain calm and equanimous in the midst of pains and discomfort, then the mind comes down to being able to see the source of thoughts arising in the mind, like a blip on a radar screen. You know, you can almost see a thought that clearly if you're really concentrated. Like the thought of your mother pops into the mind. It's like you can really see it clearly. So before you've gotten carried away by it, or you notice a thought of remembering some anger toward a person. Oh, just a bubble of anger arising. But you don't allow your mind to identify with it and get dragged away by it. So that's the way that you gradually become able to control your thoughts. So being mindful of the external body, and being aware of the subtler, the sensations of the nervous system, and then the thoughts that are triggered off by those. And then the last foundation of mindfulness is understanding the Dhamma. It's a little bit more complicated to understand, but essentially it means understanding the nature of suffering and the intricate workings of the mind that produce illusion and delusion. Until you really understand what the mind is. And again, once you understand what the mind is and how it gets trapped by our feelings and thoughts, then you also learn how to untrap it. You learn how to decondition it. Because our habits only remain strong when you keep repeating them. And we keep repeating them because we don't have our awareness at a deep enough level that we can see the thought when it's still just weak, like a blip on a radar screen. Normally we don't see it. We only see it after we've started to get carried away by it, when it's triggered off all kinds of other interconnections, and then it's more difficult to get rid of it then. So really the could call it the trick of meditation is learning how to develop that kind of subtle awareness that's able to see the feelings and then the triggers that are triggering up thoughts, and seeing the thought quick enough that it's easy to let go. So I usually tell this simile. It's a very interesting and appropriate type of simile. That it's like an octopus. You know, if an octopus gets one tentacle on you, without too much difficulty you can kind of peel it off and toss it. Right? Imagine it. Maybe you never did it, but okay? We imagine it. But each time it gets another, if you're slow, and he gets a second one on you, and every time he gets another one on you, it's more harder to get it off. And when he gets 6 or 7 or 8 on you, he drags you out to the ocean and drowns you and eats you. But that's exactly what happens with our thoughts. People get dragged away, that's being drowned in your sorrows, your worries, your greed, your hatred, your delusion, your pride and your conceit, drowning, being totally inundated by these types of emotions. Or like sunk in depression. And in the worst case scenario, they'll eat a person. That means the person will suffer a severe nervous breakdown or worse, commit suicide. It happens all too frequently. And it's because people have not learned the truth about their mind. And even if they've learned some truth about it, they haven't practiced enough to actually use that truth to control their thoughts and emotions and reactions. So, you know, that's also included in the practice of the Dhamma. Not only to understand the mind, but to develop the kind of practice that actually allows you to transform the aspects of our mind that keep us caught in suffering and delusion, and to experience the gradual freedom and liberation that comes from not being trapped by these, especially the unwholesome, what we call defilements of the mind. That means thoughts based on greed, hatred, and delusion. And the practice of Dhamma, practicing Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, all of these are the ways that we integrate our understanding into our actions of the daily life, to develop right understanding, right thought, right speech. Because the way we understand the world and what the world is, how it came to be, what the ultimate purpose of life is, whatever our belief is, our worldview, whether it's a religious worldview or it's a philosophical worldview, that's the way we're going to think. And the way you think is the way you're going to speak. And the way you speak is the way you're going to act with the body. And the way you act with the body is how you're going to live your life. And so if those views are crooked, so to speak. If you have a crooked view, that means at least a wrong view that leads to suffering, then your thoughts are going to be unskillful. And if your thoughts are unskillful, your speech will be unskillful. And if your speech is unskillful, your actions will be unskillful. So that's why the Buddha so much emphasized having the right view. But the right view comes from the insights you get through meditation. And also it includes what are called the 3 levels of wisdom. The first level of right view is intellectual right view. So, most of us never heard about the Dhamma, until you were probably at least a teenager or an adult, because it wasn't taught much in this country before 30, 40 years ago. So you might have just believed whatever your parents' religion was or your philosophical beliefs. But then you hear the Dhamma. Wait a minute, this is different. What do you mean, 4 Noble Truths? Suffering, meditation. So you hear the Dhamma and it's kind of gets you interested. Oh, that's interesting. Let me check it out. So you study a little bit more. Then you start getting a desire to want to practice. Or you start to observe things in your daily life and reflect. Or you start practicing meditation. So the intellectual understanding spurs your interest to want to start practicing. You hear about meditation, that sounds cool, let me try that. And you go to a couple of meditation classes or go to a couple of retreats and you get some deeper experience. You go, wow, that's cool. And you get this desire to want to learn more. And then that what used to be an intellectual understanding starts to go from just the head down into the heart, you might say. And so it's no longer just an intellectual understanding about, let's say, the law of karma, or about suffering, attachment is the cause of suffering, about how the ego is a cause of suffering, because you've seen it in your own life and reflecting on it. So the intellectual understanding starts you to meditate. As you meditate, that goes from just the head intellectual understanding to a more intuitive level. And then at some point, then the mind will open up and you'll get the full-blown kind of transcendental insights that what are called the wisdom coming from, deep meditation, which you could think about for all of your life and never taste it. So it's like, knowing all the recipes for good tasting soups and food, but if you never tasted it, you still, really won't know what the taste of it is. So it's the same way with our understanding. So, that's why this, the 4 foundations of mindfulness is this path that leads from the external world back through the levels of our body, feelings and thoughts, to reconnect with the natural wisdom of the universe, the natural Dhamma, which we all have as the intrinsic and inherent nature of even before consciousness. We talk about consciousness, but for most people consciousness means subject-object divided consciousness. I'm aware of things outside. But that's a creation. That's not the natural state of the mind. That's not natural awareness. And that sense of self and division can be transcended in deeper levels of meditation. when you're no longer reacting so much to things going on around you, the mind gradually regains its natural vibration of present moment awareness, in which the feelings of I and self, inside and outside, they all kind of start blending together and dissolve, basically. And only that can be, experienced in meditation. You can't think yourself into that state. Although the thinking might be a help you, but ultimately you have to develop it enough where the thinking gets put aside. And then you will know. And so, all the different things you might read about the Dhamma, the 3 characteristics about all things are impermanent, all things are not self. These are all aspects of that intellectual wisdom, but they're pointing to a deeper existential type of experience that's there deeper in the mind. And then you will know for yourself the cause of suffering. And then you will also know how to end it, or to gradually lead your life in a way that brings that state of suffering more and more in conflict with the world, brings it to a gradual end. But again, for most people that will be a lifetime process. But it has to start somewhere. Where does it start? Ground zero. Your butt pressing the cushion. To put it bluntly, excuse my French. But that's where it starts. Oh yes, I'm sitting. Ground zero. Wherever the body is connected to the floor, that's the starting point. And you go from that to, the breathing, okay. Then you get more deeply connected, feeling the subtle breaths, then you start feeling the subtler sensations. Then you start seeing your reactions to those sensations. Then you start seeing the thoughts that are being triggered off by that, and the urges, like the urge to want to scratch. So that's why in meditation, actually, enduring pain is a very, very important part of developing meditation. The average person, when they're feeling the slightest little discomfort, they want to move to get rid of that, feeling. But every time you do that, you reinforce the idea that I don't like it, and that this is bothering me. So actually you reinforce the sense of ego and self and the habit of aversion. So in meditation, we train ourselves to notice when this discomfort is arising by just being aware of discomfort arising, discomfort arising. Okay, just watch it, just relax, no big deal, it's not that bad. And try to relax around it. Just observe that discomfortable sensation as it's kind of welling up. You can see the mind kind of wincing a little bit, or maybe some muscles in the body, tensing up. And you keep telling yourself, just relax, relax. And without willing to move. And by observing it for 5 or 10 or 15 or more seconds, you see that the sensation will change by itself and very often disappear within 15 or 20 seconds. Or that painful sensation would diminish to the point where you can endure it more easily, and then carry on your meditation and forget about it. But most people don't give it the chance. They immediately want to just remove any little irritation that comes to them. And that way they never reach a deeper level of nervous system tranquility or nervous system equanimity. Because it takes effort. Right effort is a hallmark of all the Buddhist teaching. Unfortunately in this modern world, in some meditation circles, they say, oh, don't make any effort. Just sit long enough and enlightenment will happen to you. Lots of luck.
Lots of luck, yeah.
So anyway, but it has to be the right effort. It has to be a balanced effort. Right? And that requires right understanding. So that's why right understanding comes first. And then you think about what you understand. And then you align your speech and your actions to accord or accommodate that kind of understanding. And then the process takes up its own momentum. The hardest part is overcoming those initial hurdles of stubborn ignorance and clinging to our stubborn beliefs and overcoming some of the grosser types of strong habits. Once you reach a certain point, then that process builds up momentum, its own momentum. Because the body and mind will start remembering, that's the truth. See, we've been tricked and conned by ignorance our whole life. We don't know the truth, but the truth is already there within you. And once you break through those initial gross barriers through creating the right effort, it's like a breakthrough happens. The subtle inner nature makes a connection with outer nature vibrations. And it starts to then be drawn toward the natural tranquility rather than the gross types of excitement and disturbances. So it starts working in your favor, actually. But to reach that point, it takes a considerable amount of practice.
But constant effort as well.
But it has to be right effort, the right effort. In the Eightfold Path, the Buddha always prefaced all the 8 steps to the Rightfold Path with the word samma, which means even, an even middle balanced way of the view, avoiding the extremes, because we all know the Buddha's teaching, the Eightfold Path, is called the middle path. So it avoids the extremes of views, the extremes of speech, not keeping silent and not talking too much. Always keeping the middle path between the extremes. Not denying yourself any pleasure, but not overly being addicted and craving sensual pleasure. So, but each person has to find that for themselves. So I think it's maybe enough.